Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It's going to take some time, let everyone else kind of roll in here so we make sure we got attendance fully up to speed. So don't mind us up here. We'll just be chatting away a little bit as we kill some time. I thought one of the fun things we can do to start off here, talking about security reviews, most of us are in sales here. One of the things I want to learn from the panel is like, what do you guys want to go into when you like first started your collegiate educations? Because not everyone always says like, oh, I want to be CTO. I always want to be VP of sales. So Matt, why don't we start with you actually? So what was it that you intended on like starting out being?
It's funny. I started off in the market with entering the business school, focusing on marketing. Honestly, I had no idea what I'm doing. I kind of just listened to my parents. I wasn't very good at math. I wasn't very good at like science or anything like that. And I talked a lot in school and I always got in trouble for that. So my parents told me that I should probably go into sales. So I think my freshman year, marketing was the closest thing to sales. So I just kind of went with that. And my dad always told me, hey, if you wanted to be successful in life, you need leverage, and commissions is a way to have leverage to earn more than you normally can. So go and do that.
Oh, that's so great. Numbers tough, talking easy, go to sales. I love it. Brad, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have two, like many of us here, I'm sure, I guess I've kind of two careers, right? And I always knew I wanted to be a software developer, and that's sort of my headline of what I am today. But by always knew, I mean, my mom has pictures of me that I drew when I was 5 years old in crayon of I want to be a computer programmer when I grow up. But in college, I actually did a maybe slightly ill-advised attempt to build a poker bot with a friend. And that involved a little bit of reverse engineering of the security of the poker system so we could connect our bot instead of a human. So that was my first bite of the security apple, and definitely loved it and have pursued it ever since.
You're going to get a lot of DMs afterwards about poker.
It didn't work and we never made any money, to be super clear.
Oh, okay. So then you're not going to get any now. Okay, perfect. And Peter, what about yourself?
I think starting off on college as a mechanical engineer, I wanted to be an inventor because for some reason, as a young 19-year-old, I still thought that was a real career. But like really developing something like touchable, tangible. And I don't know, man, once I got exposed to like the fast moving world of SaaS and the, sort of like lucrative upsides there, I haven't looked back.
So you were kind of bummed out when the pet rock got taken and you didn't beat everyone to it, the touchable, tangible thing. Totally get it. Well, cool. Thanks, everyone. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started here because we have a good amount of people attending. So welcome, everyone. So just wanted to give you guys an introduction here. So today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. And for those of you that are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is actually the largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management. And you should now have access community. If you don't, well, just want to let you know, we have great live sessions like what you're about to experience today through our robust online forum. In the near future, we're gonna have some in-person events again. Cross your fingers. So those of you who weren't previously attended, you should all have access community now. And if you don't hesitate to drop our team a note via modernsaleshq.com. Next slide. And if you like this content, you will love our upcoming Revenue Excellence Summit, the Mega SCO. The SCO your team actually wants to attend. That's a spicy line. I might get some VPs and CROs mad at me for that one. It's happening January 18th through the 20th, and we'll be diving into the people, processes, and technology needed to help you get ready for 2022. But enough about MSP. Today's session wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Conveyor. So now I'm going to hand it off to Matt Doherty to say a few words about Conveyor. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So really appreciate having MSP hosting us today. Conveyor is a platform that helps companies go through the security review process with their customers and prospects. So our whole goal is to expedite the process so that we as salespeople can get our deals closed quicker. So automating and streamlining everything from getting your NDA signed, sharing your security documents, like your SOC 2, other things like that, automating that. And then if you get some of those fun questionnaires, we have solutions and services in place that help you respond to those questionnaires to get those done quickly. So it's all about saving time and giving your customers and prospects a delightful experience.
Awesome. Thank you. So thank you, Matt and Conveyor. And so today we're going to be talking about turning security conversations into competitive advantages. We have some great experts in the field here to talk through this content. We have Matt, we have Brad, and we have Peter. But before we get started, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with security conversations in the sales process. Let's go alphabetical to start. Brad, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Brad. I'm the co-founder of Census. If you don't know Census, we're a data integration platform that helps you get your customer data into all the tools you use, using your data warehouse as the source of truth. My background in security comes largely from being forged in the fires of it as a founder. I'm a coder by background, but we realized very early on in the Census days that we were going to need a pretty strong story, around security. And I was previously a founder of a single sign-on platform, it's kind of similar to Okta, if you're familiar with that. And so had some experience with, with software security, but also have learned a lot about compliance and privacy as well in the current role. Started my career at Amazon and have been sort of a serial startup employee / founder since then.
Thank you. And then Matt, yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the VP of sales and I lead customer success as well here at Conveyor. So currently our solution is right at the middle of the security review process. So we speak with a lot of sales ops teams. We speak with a lot of security teams. So we have gotten to know this process very well. Prior to this, I spent 5 years at Lyft, starting the B2B business for Lyft, and we sold to a variety of different organizations, had to deal with security reviews there. And then prior to Lyft, I was an enterprise sales rep for about 12 years. Most of that was spent at Oracle, where as a sales rep, I had to deal with this as well. So I've had it from sales rep, sales leader, and now I live and breathe this on a daily basis.
Very cool. Thanks. And then Peter, yourself.
Yeah, Peter, I'm here from solutions at Iterable, and I have perhaps the least enviable task of being on the front lines and processing probably over 100 of these for businesses of all different shapes and sizes. Before this, I was doing implementation, so I've sort of seen both sides of the fence. And as a side gig, I also manage the Colorado chapter for Pre-Sales Collective. So if there's anybody in pre-sales or sales engineering, and you're also in Colorado, give me a shout.
Nice plug. Love that. So great to have you all here. Really excited to dive in, especially as an account executive myself, where security reviews is definitely part of a sales motion. I'm sure it is for a lot of the folks in the audience as well. First, wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping. So we can go to the next slide here. Oh, nope, I went too far. First, we got to talk about the agenda. Sorry, folks. So what we're going to be going over today is establishing your security credentials. What are the basics you should know? What security information should you share and when? How to partner with your security team to reduce uncertainty and make the sales process more predictable. And then what about when a security review is unavoidable? So real quick before diving into it, want to do a couple of housekeeping things. So great to have you all here. Really excited to dive in. First thing, this event is being recorded. So you'll be able to access this recording and the key takeaways on previous events page of the MSP website. And second, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function. We'll be sure to get them during this event. So let's dive into it now. If we can go over the first topic that we have for the day, which is taking the bull by the horns. So the first thing is customers will want information to your security credentials and love to understand, like, what are the basics you should know about establishing said security credentials. So Brad, why don't we start with you today? What are the basics you should know about in establishing your security credentials?
Right. So it's a great question. And I think, knowing ahead of time, because it's going to come up earlier and earlier in sales processes. I think we've seen this trend across the industry that security questions get asked by smaller companies and earlier in the process. The really important thing to know these days is your certifications. And that boils down largely to Do you have a SOC 2, type 1 or 2? It almost doesn't necessarily matter if you know what that means, just sort of whether or not you have it is the important thing. Do you have an ISO certification? And then do you have HIPAA are the big three that show up in our world. As you get bigger, you might also get into things like FedRAMP or government certifications as well. But knowing this sort of bulleted list of what certifications your company has, which ones they're working on, and which ones they don't have are really important. And then I think the second thing that I really encourage is know what, and this is especially true if you're a sort of a new kind of software, if you're doing things differently than previous SaaS, but know what category your buyers should be evaluating you against. So a specific example of this is, if you are a new kind of way of interacting with customer data and you're not calling yourselves a CRM, it still might be useful to tell your buyer, you should evaluate us like you'd evaluate your CRM. We store the same kind of data, we have the same kind of users, and we have the same kind of security stance, because your buyer is often not going to know what sort of slot they should put you in when they're evaluating you. And so giving them some guidance, some steering on think of us like this kind of software can be really useful.
Well, that's really great. And Matt, anything you want to add to that?
I think it's important to know, like kind of to what Brad's saying, you need to know like what your application or your solution does. Like what data are you actually going to hold? Like what other systems are you going to integrate with? And that's important because if the company you're selling to has a security team, that security team is going to place you in a certain risk category, low, medium, or high, or whatever it is. And it largely depends on the type of data you house and the integrations that you have to other applications in their environment. So it's important to know that, because you don't want to get thrown into a high risk if you're not integrating with anything mission critical, or you're not taking on PII data. So you want to make sure you fall into the right category. In addition to like the certifications and the policies you adhere to, you need to know the details of your product. Do you support SSO? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you encrypt data at rest and in transit? You need to know your product, and you need to know the security features as well.
I love that. And then Peter, what do you have to add on that topic?
I would plus one to what Brad and Matt said, but the biggest thing is, as an SC and for SCs in the room, I would say it's super valuable for you to have a general understanding of what these certs mean in terms of like what additional value they might confer to the customer. And that can get you ahead of a ton of really sort of ambiguous or maybe not even productive questions. So as an example, working here at Iterable, we are not PCI compliant, but once you understand what PCI compliance is and the types of data that it protects, it doesn't really make sense for them to be storing that type of data in the platform. And so once you have an understanding outside of just, hey, this is an acronym, and more, hey, I'm a customer, why should I care about what these certifications represent? I think you can do a lot of good for yourself and save yourself a lot of time in the sales cycle.
I love that. And it brings up something that I want you guys to have a chance to answer on. So, as sales reps, we get enabled on, hey, this is the product and this is how the person you're selling to should use it. You get enabled a lot on personas and like who is it you're actually talking with. But I think a lot actually gets neglected of like, what are the security credentials that we have that people are definitely going to be asking about. So can you guys maybe share a little bit of like, for VPs of sales or revenue operations people in the room, like how much enablement maybe should go towards a rep of understanding security and privacy that'll ask at a high level, and how much should just be put off towards like the security team and letting them handle those conversations? Let's start with Matt. Why don't you start from answering that off?
Yeah, I think you have to have the high level understanding so you can have those initial conversations. I think the important thing from a sales rep standpoint is making sure that as you're doing your qualification around like budget and what their evaluation process is, like, don't forget to ask about other stakeholders. Legal is going to be involved, like who else is involved in the process? What role does security play? To just don't forget to ask about that. You don't want it to surprise you later. So that's the key piece I've always told my team. They always felt like, well, I don't want to introduce something that's going to delay my deal. It's like, well, the alternative is you forecast the deal to me, and then you're popped with the security review at the last minute, and then your deal's now pushed out 2 weeks. So it's like, don't forget about it, and then be able to articulate your process based on what the prospect or the customer is telling you their security role looks like.
Oh, that's really great. Brad, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I always take a data-centric view of these things, right? And so a lot of times it's going to be, if we're going to go into a POC, and obviously not everyone runs trials or POCs as part of the sales process, but if you are, what kind of data is going to need to go into the tool, and where is that data going to come from? And, 99% of the time, the security, privacy, compliance questions that your customer has are going to flow out of what is the kind of data we're talking about. Is it personal data? Is it health data? Is it payments data? Is it none of the above? So getting, at least understanding in terms of enablement, what kinds of data your application, that the product you're selling uses and needs in order to be successful, will help you shortcut to that. And I think Matt is absolutely right. Like, I think trying to skirt a security review by not bringing it up is 99% of the time not going to make it. Vendor assessment teams and procurement teams are getting more sophisticated every day. The era of shadow IT, I think, is coming to a close. And so I think getting ahead of the security stuff is pretty important there. The last thing I would add, and this isn't true of every product, but if your product does have a security feature or posture or stance that makes it unique or different, make sure that your AEs and the members of your sales team know what that is. Some products have interesting pieces of design where it's like, we do things in a different way such that we don't require your customer data, unlike our competitors, right? So if you have that, that's actually an asset, not sort of something that's just a negative in a review.
That's great. And then Peter, want to take us home? Any other points you want to add on that before going to the next topic?
Yeah, I think sort of echoing what Matt and Brad said. I mean, you want to have an understanding of what types of certifications or processes different customer use case might map to. So as an example, if you're talking with somebody in the healthcare space, HIPAA is probably going to come up. And having that baseline understanding as a rep is, I think, a requisite. As an SC, maybe you can even take it one layer deeper. What will that inform in terms of use cases or in terms of caveats throughout the sales process? And then one other piece I'll mention is a colleague of mine will always use the phrase, organize, don't agonize. So it only takes one SC to lean in, become buddies with the security team, and then all of a sudden they're proactively updating you on all of the new things. And then what we can do is repurpose that, create a narrative around it and share it with the rest of the sales team and the AEs so that we're not having to sort of rebuild the wheel every time these new updates come out.
Organize, don't agonize. I like that one. Thanks, folks. So we're going to go into the next topic here. I want to talk about. So when you think about including security in the sales conversation, so what security information should you share, and when, particularly in the sales cycle, should you be sharing said information? And I think we started with Brad last time around. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'd love, Matt, for you to kick us off here.
Yeah, like I mentioned, you need to know your product security features. You need to know your high-level certifications and different regulations that you adhere to, like maybe GDPR or CCPA, things like that. I mean, those are things that you can talk about on a first call if those questions are asked early in the sales cycle. From there, it kind of goes back to just understanding what is the customer's security review process look like. And then you need to understand what is your company comfortable with sharing. A lot of companies I see, hey, you can share a SOC 2 with anyone, just make sure an NDA is in place. So just making sure you're aligned with, your legal team, your security team, that you're sharing the right information, the proper precautions are in place. Things like pen test reports, certain information security policies that someone may ask about. A lot of times your company may not want to share that until it's the very end of a sales cycle, or only with customers, because that's sensitive information. And so you just have to be able to communicate the expectations accordingly with your prospect. On the other side, though, security teams don't want to do security reviews for every vendor that comes to them. Hey, we're interested in buying this vendor, because they have a ton of different other responsibilities. And so they likely aren't going to do a security review on you until you're down to the last couple of vendors on the short list.
Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think what Matt said is exactly right. The way we model things at Census, we have basically 4 kind of tiers of security information or access that we can give to our customers. The simplest is collateral on your website, right? You should have a security page on your website. It should, of course, have your certifications, but ideally like some information about your system design, some repeatable assets that are vetted by your product security team, that so that you don't have to make this up on the spot. You can direct people to, these are public assets. In our case, we have a white paper that talks a little about system architecture, and that's the low friction sort of tier 1 for us, right? Anyone can access that information. The medium friction tier 2 is that SOC 2, which is requires a click through NDA. And that's something we're comfortable sharing with a light touch, but it's always useful, as with any sales process, to have a little bit of customer skin in the game there, and a single click NDA is a tiny amount of skin. And then the heavy lift processes for us that we keep sort of behind the curtain are the pen test results that Matt was talking about, and finally the security questionnaire. And so I think it's useful if there's always sort of one more thing left that the customer hasn't pulled on yet, for a buyer who's cautious, or maybe their security team is cautious, to say, hey, can you give us a little more? If there's always a more to give, and you don't have to make it up on the spot, you'll be in a much better shape.
That's really interesting. Peter, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, and just circling back, the question is like, what security information and when? Exactly.
Yeah, which security information that I have as the vendor, and when I'm actually sharing that with the prospective buyer.
Right. So I think this has been mentioned, but what I would totally say is it depends, right? Like, you have got to know to what degree it's important to the person that you're talking to. And sometimes that'll be a cagey process. Sometimes it will just be destined for that last minute spike in work towards the end of the sales cycle. But do what you can to understand the level of security involvement in a particular deal as in advance as you can. Understand how it's gone previously. Whatever information they can share can help you gauge what amount of resources you may need to deploy or not. The other thing is, Brad, I really liked how you were talking about sort of like these different tiers in the spectrum. So we have a trust site at Iterable. If you don't have a trust website, like, talk to your security engineers. My guess is they would love to formalize their stance and positioning, because it's going to save them a lot of time. The next layer that I find myself using a lot is transitioning a lot of that sort of jargon heavy security talk into slides. And the reason a different medium really helps is because, hey, as an SC, like, I don't live on the website, I live in presentation. And what I need to facilitate those conversations is going to be a different medium than potentially what serves people who are just driving by the website. And so having those different sort of formats and modalities can help to like push this information deeper in and make it more easily accessible and discussable with more stakeholders in your company.
Yeah, and following up there a little bit, like, just to add one more thing, I think it's important to determine the relationship that your buyer has with their security team. In a very broad sense, like, the buyer, if they're very small or they're security conscious, they might be the vetter, right? They might have the questions themselves, but more often than not, they're going to have a team with which they have maybe a semi-adversarial relationship, right? They want to buy, and this team is in their way. And figuring out who holds the power in that relationship between your buyer and your buyer's security team is important as well. Because that'll, and I don't want to jump too far ahead. I know that we have this on the agenda ahead, but that'll determine sort of, how much you're willing to give to that security team in order to close the deal.
So let's go back to something that we talked a little bit about, or Brad and Matt, you were talking about, like the progression of what you are actually sharing with the representative. And I think, Brad, you were the one that said it, like, you don't want to be caught flat-footed with somebody asking for more and you don't have any more. Hypothetical. You have a situation where you are flat-footed and you are in the security review, and it's a fairly important opportunity, not only for yourself, but for the company. What's like the best way to get around that when you do find yourself in a flat-footed kind of situation, and it's just like an email correspondence of like, can we get this, can we get that, and you have nothing to share? Do you want to kick it off, and then I'll pass it over to Matt for anything he can add?
Yeah. For us, when we get caught flat-footed, and it does happen, the ultimate kind of cop-out is, do you want to get on a call with our head of security, me in this case? That's not the most scalable cop-out, but for an important deal, like, it's something I do a few times a quarter, and it's absolutely part of my job, and I enjoy doing it. But when you set up those calls, it has to be with the right stakeholders in the room. Ideally, both the buyer and the buyer security team are on the call together. You don't want to be playing telephone game there. So that's the flat-footed response is, let's talk to a human in our security team who's an expert for us. I think beyond that, it's, maybe about switching the conversation around, like asking the customer, what is it you were expecting to get? What is, when you've gone through this process with other vendors, what did they provide that we didn't provide? That can be dangerous. That can be a little fraught, but I think it can be successful as well.
I really like that last piece. Matt, do you have anything to say best practice wise for when you get to the flat-footed situation?
Yeah, I think this is where you can lean on your champion and try to get them to be an advocate on your behalf. So your champion, you're solving a problem for them and they want to use your product as quickly as they can. And they don't want to have to delay it any further than is necessary. And the security team, whoever's responsible for security, they don't want to be a bottleneck either. That doesn't make them feel good. They want to enable and help their colleagues do their jobs well, but they also have a responsibility to make sure the company is secure. So I think if you're caught flat-footed, this is an opportunity to test your champion. Hey, look, this is unexpected. We're all kind of in a tough spot here. You want this quickly. The security team wants this done well, but also efficiently. Can we expedite this in the fastest way as a call? And then have your information ready. Like, here's all the information we have about our security posture, and be proactive.
I like that. I took away from there, remember that on the other end, there is a human being that actually wants to get things and make people happy. They're not there to just like shut everything down. I like that. Peter, do you have anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up and go to the next topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of thinking like Brad, we do have like the Jamie button, the APB button in terms of like bringing them into our calls. And they actually kind of dig it to a degree, right? Like sales is fun and they kind of get to participate in that sort of experience. So don't feel like completely reluctant to do that. But I would say, speaking on their behalf, like do as much as you can to contextualize that conversation, because just like, sales or an SC person, going into a conversation with limited context is going to be less fun. And ultimately, it's probably not going to serve your deal in the best possible way.
I love that. So we're going to go to the third topic here. And Peter, I'm going to have you kick us off on this one. So biggest complaint we usually hear is how uneven the security process can be. So how would you recommend you partner with the security team, your security team, to reduce uncertainty and make the sales process a little bit more predictable? So Peter, I'd love to kick it off with you.
Yeah, I love this question because I think it kind of answers itself. If you can partner with your own security team, you can, pretty much assure that your security process with other clients is going to be a little bit smoother. People in security, in my opinion, are pretty cool. And I'm always struck by like the unique lens that they see the product through, which is leaps and bounds ahead of my perspective, even as a product expert. So especially like as an SC, by keeping yourself appraised of like the different trends and like this the certification and security space, and like leaning into that with allies that you make on that team, it'll be super easy to call in a favor when you need to. We talked about bringing them in terms of big deals to avoid things like telephone and mischaracterizing what the client said. But I'll also say with that you can build a ton of advocacy for your counterparts on the security team who are strapped with a ton of other things by doing what you can to like prove out your own diligence. What I mean by that is you have tools like Conveyor, any other type of answer library. If you can take an honest first pass at this and get ahead and self-service however you can, you're going to be miles ahead when you have to make that request and say, hey, I've got 50 questions I don't know how to answer. I've answered the first 20, but I really need your help. If you demonstrate that partnership to your security team, they will be so much more willing to help you.
That's great, Peter. Brad, want to kick it off to you? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing Peter said there, as someone who is usually that representative of the security team, like I love to see a questionnaire, if we do get to the questionnaire stage, where, my AE or someone on my sales team has at least taken a stab on a draft of it and said, here, I'm knocked out all the low-hanging fruit. Because, for all of these 50, 100, I think we got a 285 question security questionnaire the other day. And 90% of those will be sort of, grab an answer from your knowledge base. Ours happens to be Conveyor, but, whatever it might be, and fill it in. And then I would much rather have something that's 90% filled that I can then review, audit, and enhance, rather than something that sort of is a blank slate and saying, help, we got this 285 questionnaire. I think, speaking to, and I don't know if we have anyone in this audience, but you can, ask your security team to do this. If you are a security team for a vendor, you should be providing a roadmap the same way that your product team does, right? The same way that you have a product roadmap that says, here's what we're planning to build in the next quarter, the next year, and potentially here's what we're not planning to build. Security evolves as well, right? I'll take for any given customer request, the security team should have an idea of that's something that we were planning to build and we just haven't gotten around to it. And maybe this will be the trigger that gets us there. We're not planning to build it soon, or we actively think it's a bad idea. Because a lot of times the security team, needs some leverage to get their own priorities done. They've wanted to build some particular control or compliance audit or new piece of infrastructure in place, but they haven't had the leverage, and a deal can be that leverage. So it's useful to know what the low-hanging fruit is on the security team's roadmap and what the things are that they were thinking about doing anyway. Because if your deal, just pushes that forward a quarter, that's a win for everyone.
You're on mute, Sean.
I was. Matt, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, make sure you provide as much context as possible to the security team about the opportunity. Security teams are often viewed as a cost center, and they want to show that they're also revenue enablers. They're part of the process to help get deals across the line. So if you explain the context and the strategic nature of the deal, they'll feel a sense of ownership with it. So I think it's important to get that buy-in from them that they're helping contribute to the growth of the company. Again, going back to make sure you know the prospects process, you can communicate that to them and set their expectations. Hey, this is where we are. This is what they're going to ask of us. This is the first step. We're going to have a questionnaire after this. Make sure they know it. The other piece I would do, and this is probably more for like sales ops or sales leaders, is, and a lot of this depends on like where you are as an organization and how much leverage you have over your prospects and customers, but start thinking about like policies that you put in place. Hey, we only respond to questionnaires above a certain dollar threshold. We just don't have time to respond to all these questionnaires. A 10K deal, we can't spend a week's worth of people hours to complete a questionnaire for deals under 10K. Now, if you're an early stage startup, you're probably not going to push back like that. You just want to get the deal done. You're going to do whatever you can. But as you get more mature and you have more leverage, start putting those policies in place. And so you can just, hey, sorry, like we have this policy. We can't do this unless the deal's 15K. Is there any way we can get the deal up? We're looking at these options that we have that could get the deal to that amount. Maybe we can just add that in and get this done quicker. I've seen a lot of companies, they're more mature, but they have thresholds in place where they just won't even do certain steps of the security process, and helps their teams go a lot faster.
That's really great. That's great insight on the negotiation tactic there. So I want to talk more about like the team itself, the security team. It's always the security team. And we just talked a little bit in the last question of like, hey, it's a human on the other end right there that's not there to just shut it down. We're talking about partnering up. Can you guys share some best practices on what a sales organization, a sales leader, or like a sales rep or revenue operations of like, how do you form a relationship with another security team on the other end? Maybe some best practices that you guys have that you've used, or Brad, would love to hear from you from the security side. Aside from just sending a swag bomb of all the things that I have Atrium to a security person, how do I form a relationship so things can go a little bit smoother? Let's start this off with you, Brad.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the best things you can do there as someone who, Census is a smaller company, so I serve as the security team in both directions, right? Both reviewing software we buy and helping others review our software. So I get to see both sides of this. But I think you'll find that individual security practitioners and teams tend to have a few things that they focus on, and those vary from company to company. Some companies might be very focused on privacy. Some companies might be very focused on making sure that they get, a rapid response to a breach notification, or that, the data is encrypted at rest. And so everyone will send you more or less the same questionnaire with more or less the same, 80 to 250 questions. But they're going to really care about the answers to a few of those. So the faster you can get to like which of these 250 or whatever it is questions do you truly care about? And that's really just about, establishing contact with the individual as quickly as possible. There's almost always an individual who's assigned the security review on your buyer's side, not sort of a floating team thing. So find that individual's name, get them on a thread, and, figure out what's really important to them. And don't minimize obviously the other things, but you're going to find out that a very tiny percentage of that huge questionnaire is the thing that they really care about. Maybe it's because they have a particular interest in it. Maybe because they got burned on it with another vendor. But the quicker you can get to that, the more productive your conversation is going to be.
I love that. Peter, someone like you that's on the front line of this quite a bit, do you have any best practices for the audience?
Yeah, I feel like a big thing that I've found success in is building your credibility up front, not just saying, hey, I'm the SC, but saying, hey, I've worked with other similar customers like you, so you probably care about X. Now you can totally get yourself in trouble by, assuming too much, but I think you can come with a little bit of a point of view and be open to like feedback and understanding what that sort of black swan criteria is, to Brad's point. Once you understand that, if you've led with credibility, they'll be so much more willing to partner with you than if, again, they're just this ambiguous, sort of like blocker on the other end of a Zoom call.
Love that. And Matt, what about you before we get into our next topic here?
Some things I've done in the past that I've taught my teams to do is, and it's not necessarily just security, right? There's other people that are going to be involved. Like there's going to be lawyers involved to go through the contract. And so much of how a lawyer redlines a contract or how a security team looks at your app is dependent upon the context. Like, what does your application do? And you have to understand, like, these security team members have no idea. Like they get this thing thrown over the fence to them. They don't really know what it does. They got to spend time doing research, taking time away from their process. So I've always told my team, when they're at the right point, get their champion, be like, hey, why don't we go get the other stakeholders? Let's set up a 30-minute meeting. Let's just give everybody context about what this is. And let's just help them understand, this is the box we're in. This is what our application is going to do. This is why you're buying it. Let's just set that context now and allow them to have that understanding before something gets blindly thrown over the fence. And then they start putting you in a category that you shouldn't be in. So I try to look at it from perspective of, they also want this done quickly. They don't want to waste too much time on this. So, hey, this is the way we've seen it work the best. Let's just have a quick 30-minute stakeholder call so they understand the content.
I think that was a great last point. And I can admit that I've even made this mistake of assuming that the team or the security contact I had a lot of context and knew how the solution was applicable. And there's so many times when you're dealing with security teams, they are never going to be using your solution. So you really have to start from ground zero and use the champion. I think that's a great reminder, good checkpoint for anybody that's making those sales. Thanks for that, Matt. So want to get into the last topic that we have right here before we wrap up from the panel questions. And this one's around, like, what about when a security review is just completely unavoidable? Now, I think that we have talked a little bit about this up to this point, but would love to hear your take. And Matt, we can start with you on this one about what you do when a security review is just absolutely unavoidable in your sales process.
And I think Brad mentioned this, right? Like nowadays, security reviews are just going to happen. Like shadow IT is getting squeezed out of organizations. So it's not about there. For the most part, it's going to be unavoidable in most situations. Are you doing too much for the situation? Like, are you being thrown into a certain category that you don't need to be? Like, hey, we don't touch PII, we don't process credit card information. Like, why are we being thrown into this super rigorous process for high risk vendors? Like, that's not us. So just make sure you're in the right category and the security reflects the solution you're bringing to that organization. I mean, if you are a sales rep and you're selling to startups, especially earlier stage startups, most of them are going to be comfortable with a SOC 2 type 2 report. You have that, it's over. But if you're selling to banks, healthcare organization, telcos, or even like a Fortune account, just get ready, like it's coming, and be ready for the pain. There's no way around it. If Disney is going to buy your software and they tell you to jump, you're going to say how high. Like, you want that deal done. So just make sure you're in the right category and that it's worth it. That would be my piece of it. And then, like I said, the person who's your champion, who's your buyer, they want this done quickly. Make sure you set expectations with them. Like, hey, this is going to take a while, so that they know and you're not creating friction there, because then they can be your help on the other side to keep things moving along. Because oftentimes this is an iterative process where you fill out a questionnaire, their team reviews it, they have follow-up questions. Like, you want that to go as quickly as possible. So set those expectations and get the champion to help you on the inside.
That's fantastic. Brad, anything you want to add onto that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt's point about pace is an important one, right? The bigger the buyer, the slower their procurement process. We all know that. And the security process will also slow down to match that. One of the mistakes that I made, I think, early in the days of Census, when I was filling out a lot of security questionnaires, was thinking that there would be a huge leverage advantage in us returning around questionnaires in the same day or something like that. And every once in a while there is, like, speed is always better. But it's worse to push a rushed product out the door in terms of a security review or a questionnaire or whatever it might be, and potentially put something in the brain of your buyer or your buyer's security team that they're never going to be able to get out, than to go slow, sort of take things a few at a time, because they're going to go slow in reading it, is the unfortunate reality. And so I think there's an old, like, I think this is a Navy expression, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? Basically, when you get into that really big, heavy security review, know that it's going to take a long time. So treat it as a project, treat it with the appropriate attention, try to get things right on the first try. Ultimately, those companies are largely looking for reasons to say no, right? So if you can just take away all their reasons to say no, the default answer is yes. So don't accidentally plant a seed in their head of a reason to say no.
Love that. Also wasn't familiar that was a Navy term. That was just a golf term. It never works for me because my swing is erratic, but that's good to know. Peter, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the final thing I'll add is it's less about like if it's unavoidable and more about like just sort of smoothing out the spikes as I see it. So I would challenge people that like 85 or more %, especially according to some of my security team, of these things are avoidable insofar as they don't need to come right at the end and have that degree of urgency. If they're matching some of the profiles that Matt was describing in terms of these Fortune 100 companies, like in a particular sensitive vertical, like these are flags for you to like figure out how you can start to multi-thread those conversations, how you can get ahead of it. Because once you're ahead of it, if you can process it in parallel and partner with your security team, then it's not going to feel like this beast of a hurdle, right before, a couple of days before the quarter ends.
And just if we have a moment longer, like just, trailing on what Peter said there, right? Like, I think one interesting hack there, especially if your company does POCs as a standard part of your buying process, is to figure out, does the company need a security review to do a POC? And a lot of times a company will say, we can't buy without a security review, but we can do a POC, maybe with a subset of data, maybe with fake data without the security review. And that'll let those two things proceed in parallel.
Last thing kind of to end on this topic, what would you all recommend, and Matt, we can start with you, of when you start talking about like in the sales process, if something is unavoidable? Is it like your first call that you're having with your prospect, soon to be champion of understanding security reviews, or is it a little bit later in the process for you guys?
I think it comes down to when you normally start qualifying the buying process. Like whenever you're asking the normal questions, hey, how do you evaluate software over there? What does your evaluation process look like? What other stakeholders are involved? Just don't forget to ask about security at that stage. So whatever your sales process, whatever your leadership is telling you for like when you should start doing the qualification of the buying process, of the customer's buying process, make sure you just include security there.
Love that.
Brad, any quick little headset change there. Brad, anything you want to add to what Matt just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think the point of you're probably not going to, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, skirt your way around a security review in a company that does them, all the time. So get ahead of it, find out what it is. Don't be afraid to embrace it. Ideally, you can do it with documentation. I think, as was said earlier, like the SOC 2 will get you through 85% or 90% of these things. And maybe the additional supporting documents that you have in your backup stash will get you through the rest of them. But don't be afraid of the process. Know that it's more and more common. Most of them pass. The sooner you do it, the more predictable it will be both for your internal team and for your own forecast. So, embrace it to the extent that you can. And also have a warm relationship with your internal team and know what things are easy for them to give and which things are not easy for them to give.
That's great. And then Peter, anything you want to add about and when to introduce or when to understand how things are unavoidable before we get to the main takeaways from today?
I think Brad and Matt pretty much covered it.
Well put. So before we wrap things up today, guys, want to go away and get a takeaway from each of our panelists. So what's the one thing should an attendee walk away from today's event if they remember nothing else? What else is it they should take away? So Matt, we'll start with you.
Get out in front of it. Don't miss this as a step. You don't want to be person who forecasted a deal to your sales leader only to find out from your champion that there's one more thing that has to be checked off the box before they can sign the contract.
Brad?
I would say have lots of collateral and know what order you deploy it in. Know what comes first, second, third, and don't dump it all on the customer right away, right? Like string it along as they ask for more. It sort of gives you, again, always have some dry powder in the stash for, oh, you've got more questions, here's some more collateral.
Love that. And Peter, bring it home.
I would say I'm going to beat my SC drum here, but be technically curious. Figure out how to turn those like acronym soup into value points for your customer, and figure out a way to reach out like to people like Brad here, because I would be shocked if he wouldn't be willing to lend his perspective, and then building that partnership is really going to pay dividends for your opportunities to come.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. So we're going to wrap things up here. But first, want to thank everyone for attending. We've absolutely loved having you here. So thank you for our wonderful sponsor, Conveyor. They're doing great things over there, so be sure to check them out. Thank you also to Matt Doherty, Brett Buddha, and Peter Doro for providing this great content. The recordings and key takeaways will all be available on our website very shortly here. And don't forget to check out our upcoming events. Everyone stay safe, enjoy the rest of November, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.